All right, welcome back. In the last session, we got started with the integration of Databricks notebook with Azure Data Factory, wherein we spin up a notebook, wherein we have some of the transformation, wherein if you see the block, it connects with the storage account first and then runs some transformation, select some of the needed columns, it infers the schema, it lists all the columns and then it renames bunch of columns and then write the entire data to a blob storage in the form of CSV. So we saw how we could just integrate Databricks with a data factory and just initiate the pipeline using Azure Data Factory. In this session, we're gonna get started with Azure Data Factory data flows. So what is a data flow? Data flow in Data Factory is a visually designed data transformation which helps data engineers to develop data transformation logic without writing a single line of code. So what does that mean? Suppose if you do not have data flow with you, what you would generally do is for each and every step we need to write our code. Let's suppose you have certain JSON or CSV file which coming from different sources and you want to transform it, which means you want to remove the duplicate items, you want to do some inner join, outer join, use some group by or aggregation, and all of these needs to happen. If it needs to happen, you'll have to write a custom code in Spark, Scala, Python, or R. That's what we have generally do in our code based solution, right? In this example, we had to write custom code to connect with your storage account, and then we had to write a bunch of other codes also to read the data, infer the schema, make sure it gives us all the schema, and then you select all the category or columns which you want. And then you have to rename the column, have to write a bunch of other code also, and then for writing the data into some sort of blob storage or some sort of destination, you need to write again, use some sort of function to write that piece of logic. So all of these is a code-based solution. What data flow in Data Factory does, it provides you a no code solution experience, which means it gives you entirely visual experience with no coding experience or no code required at all. Your data flows runs on Azure Data Factory managed execution cluster for scaled out data processing. It handles all the code translation, path optimization, and execution of your data flow jobs. So without further ado, let's get started how data flow works in Azure Data Factory. So the use case is we have a JSON which we have stored in our source code container, and if you go to the blob, you would have a data flow container, and underneath it I have a raw JSON, and now it holds certain information about customers or users, what type of users were, what type of request they made, what was the status, location they're coming from, their last name, their first name, their registration ID, gender, and all of these are stored in the form of a JSON. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this data and read the data using Azure Data Factory data flow. So first thing first, you go to the plus sign in your canvas and you select data flow. So once you have selected the data flow, you can add multiple sources. So this is the graph section wherein it displays the transformation stream. It shows the lineage of source data where your source would be coming from. If you click right over here, you can have multiple sources, and you could have source of data coming from different type of sources. I'm going to delete it because we have only one source at the moment. So this is the first thing wherein you need to create the source first. Remember, if you had your had it not been data flow, how would you do it? You need to go to your notebook or write your Spark configuration to read your data to mount it with some sort of blob storage. So that's what we are doing using the GUIs. What we're going to do is we're going to select the source, and from here we're going to define where our source is. So I'm going to give it as a name as data source, and we've got two options, data set and data inline. What I'm going to do is I'm create a new data set. So that's going to be, there are different types of data sets you could select. Azure Blob Storage, what we're going to do, we could have SQL as well, Postgres as well, Synapse as well, SQL Server, Amazon. You could have it be over and beyond Azure ecosystem as well. So if you have your data coming from Amazon as 3 buckets, let's suppose your data coming from customers database, and your customers database is in Amazon S3 or Apache Impala or any other sources, be it Couchbase or any of the majority of the databases are supported over here, likes of HDFS, Hive, Hadoop, Magento. All of these are supported at the moment. So there are more than 70 connectors available at the time of recording the video. We have the data in Azure Blob Storage. I'm gonna select it, and then what type of data we are collecting, whether it's in Avro format, CSV, Excel. Our format is JSON, and then JSON linked, give it a name, and then you create a link service so that it can get the data for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my subscription, select the right storage account, and then pretty normal step which we have already performed multiple times in past. I'm going to test the connection. Once it's successful, I'm going to create it, and once you create it, it's going to ask where the data is. So what I'm going to do is I have already got the link service created. I'm going to click on the browse button, and I already have the data flow container created, which we just saw a couple of minutes back. I'm going to select this, and I should have one JSON over here. I'm going to select this, and then you have the option of importing schema as well. So if you remember, in your Databricks notebook, you had to infer the schema. You wrote bunch of functions to read the schema, read the data, and infer the schema from there. In Azure Data Factory, all of this is without a code solution, so you can just import the schema right from your connection store, or if you have a sample schema, you could do that also. And if you don't need a schema, you could just select none as well. So I'm gonna select the schema and click on OK. As soon as we do that, we have a bunch of options. So we've got allow schema drift, we've got infer drift column, and validate schema, all of them. So what it does is, if your schema is changing on real-time basis while in flow or ingestion, you could just use the infer drift schema as well. You could enable sampling also. By default it gives you 100. You could go up to thousands. There's a certain limit for that, so you could just enable the sampling as well. And now if you go to the source option, got bunch of options over here as well. When do you want to run it? You got a projection which gives you, I'm gonna enlarge it a little. It gives you what type of data you have. So you've got timestamp, user ID, session ID, page, and all of them, and gives you the type of data you have. It supports majority of the types, likes of array, binary, boolean, complex, state, integer, long. For our data, it is majorly got string and double. Then you go to optimize, whether you want to optimize the data, current partitioning or single partitioning, or you want to set the partitioning yourself. So you've got multiple partitions set up. You've got round robin, hash, dynamic range, fixed. So for the purpose of the demo, I'm going to keep it simple and use the current partitioning. I'm going to go to inspect and see what all schema it has. So that has got all the columns. I've got 17 columns and what type of data it is. So it is mostly string and double. Now, interesting part is, if we go to the data preview, you see that you can't see the preview because you haven't got your debug mode turned on yet. What does that mean? So in the backend, to visualize your data, you need to turn on the debug mode. You could do it right from here. What it does in the backend, all of this happens in a Spark cluster. So what it's going to do is it's going to initiate a Spark cluster and run all the transformation in the backend. So once you try to enable it, it asks whether you have what type of integration you want to select. So it's select the auto resolve region, compute type is general. So there are multiple general purpose cluster, memory optimized cluster as well. So I'm going to select the general one by default, and time to live is for how long do you want the cluster to stay updated or stay alive. So I'm going to keep it by default. I'm going to hit on OK, and this is going to take few minutes, 3 to 4 minutes, because at the background it's obviously it's spinning up a brand new Databricks Spark cluster. wherein it's going to run all the transformation. Once the cluster is enabled, it's going to have the data preview enabled for us. So we're going to give it a couple of minutes so that it spins up a Spark cluster in the background so that we can run our transformation. Alright, so you could see that there is a green tick right over here. Once your debug mode is on, we'll be able to interactively build our data flow with our active Spark cluster which is running in the background. The session will close once you turn off the debug mode from on to off. You should be aware that there's an hourly incurring charge by Databricks, because at the background, as I said earlier, it has pinned a Databricks cluster, and as long as you run that cluster in the background, it would charge you the cost, incurring cost for the Azure Databricks. In the majority of the cases, you should turn on the debug mode, do your transformation, validate your business logic by viewing the logic or transformation you've applied on your data flow, and once you're done with it, you could just turn off the cluster. You've got a debug setting right over here as well. You can edit how a data flow preview data. Debug setting can be edited by clicking over here, and then you could just select the number of rows or source file to use for each of your transformations. So you've got your data set over here, and you've got your parameters, whatever you have set in your data set. So once you do that, now you should have a refresh button coming up right over here. Now if you click on the refresh button, it would give you a holistic view of your data, how your data looks like, what are the multiple columns available, and how and you can just visualize, run some statistic on top of your data. So if you remember, in the source setting, you could just invert the schema, remove the duplicates, and all of those options as well. So it's going to take a few seconds to read the data. At the moment, what's happening is it's trying to read the data from the data set, and then it's gonna visualize you all the data. So if you could see that the first is the timestamp, then you got the user data, session ID, page, auth, and all of the data coming up over here. So you could just click on any of them and see a statistic of the data as well. Now it's going to give you a graphical representation, a pie chart representation, what type of data it is, what's the maximum length of the data. If you see the levels, so if you and then click on the particular column and then click on the statistic, it's going to give you how many of are free, how many of are paid. So if you see over here, it gives you a representation that 60% of the levels are free and 40% 60% are paid and 40% are free, 0% remaining. How many data are null? There's none of the data which is null, and then you could just modify the data right from here as well. And you do it similarly for your integers as well. Come over here and click on the refresh, and yeah, this is how it is easy to visualize your data. We haven't run any transformation. If you just click on the plus sign over here, you could just run the transformation as well. If you want, you could just remove some of the columns or duplicates which you don't need. You could just do that as well. We're going to do that in our next session, wherein we're going to get started with a simple transformation of selecting and remove some of the unwanted columns and renaming the column, and run some transformation on top of it. All right, I hope this was informative to get started with data flow. I'll see you in a while. Thank you.